It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Welcome, and thanks for tuning in to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on YouTube, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video. I'm the host of the show, Sonia Kelly, and by day, I'm the global head of the Women's World Banking Institute. Now, before we get started today, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsor of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit their website at ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Now let's jump into the show. I'd also like to take a moment as we enter this particular show to welcome those of you who are new listeners. We're going to be talking about something kind of sensitive, but I've been traveling the last couple of months to various conferences around the world, and so many of you have taken the opportunity to tell me that you're a listener, that you love the podcast, and that it was meaningful to you. And I hope this episode is also something that resonates with you, that's meaningful to you. Maybe you agree or disagree with something you hear. Maybe you're personally impacted or professionally impacted. I'm just so grateful for all of the feedback that I've received in the last few weeks, even in person, face-to-face. It matters so much to ensuring we get you the content that you need to make sure finance works for women. Now, in this episode, we're going to focus on gender-based violence and the role that finance plays in eliminating it. Today, November 25th, is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Now, before we go any further, let me just warn you that we're going to be discussing some sensitive things. And this is your reminder to be aware of who might be listening around you, and also to be aware of how you're responding as well. Nearly all of us have either a personal experience with violence or have seen people we love endure it. So please feel free to have permission from me to take a break from this episode if you need to do so. But getting to the topic, let's just start with why it matters, why we're focusing on this. To me, and I've focused my career on financial inclusion and specifically on women's financial inclusion. Financial inclusion doesn't matter at all if it doesn't make a difference in the lives of women and if it doesn't address their real world needs. Now, gender-based violence is an ongoing and acute crisis that affects hundreds of millions of women around the world. Consider this: 1 in 3 women worldwide has been subjected to either physical or sexual partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. Most violence against women is committed by intimate partners, and that's why we sometimes call it intimate partner violence. And women in low-income countries face the highest risk of experiencing intimate partner violence at almost 50% of women, compared to about a quarter of women in middle or high-income countries. Now, intimate partner violence or gender-based violence, and those things sometimes we shorthand as IPV or GBV. So if you hear that in our conversation, that's what that means. They are intersecting with financial exclusion. By that, I mean places with high gender-based violence also tend to have low levels of financial access for women. Let's think through some of the consequences of this intersection between these two things. First, a health consequence. Women who've been physically or sexually abused by their partners face significantly higher rates of health problems. The literature points out likelihood of depression, sexually transmitted infections or STIs, and significant reproductive challenges, to name a few things. And second, it impacts women's agency. Within household relationships, violence can decrease a woman's authority in her home or her community and her ability to make decisions. And it's not just relationship agency, but also financial decision making specifically. There's a study that shows that 99% of economic abuse cases where someone forces someone else to do something with their money or with financial services, 99% of those economic abuse cases are accompanied by intimate partner violence. So, why does finance matter? It's a surprisingly complicated question to answer, actually, because there is mixed evidence on the relationship between financial inclusion and gender based violence. Um, uh, and it's complicated because finance is ultimately neutral. It can be something that actually contributes to and enhances an unhealthy dynamic or an unhealthy relationship, as is the case with financial abuse. If someone has access to financial services through their partner, they might be able to abuse that. But actually, what we see as well in our work is that money in a woman's pocket and under her control allows her to choose to write her own story. And sometimes that includes the choice to walk out the door. And actually, that is a direct quote from the president and CEO of Women's World Banking, Mary Ellen Iskandarian. I want to give one example of what an entire market system is doing to address this, just so you have something concrete to anchor on as we go into our conversation. There's a woman in Australia named Rosie Batty. Her partner became violent about 10 years ago. And as a result of that violence, her son Luke was killed by his father when he was 11 years old. Now, rather than stay silent, Rosie, Luke's mother, became an activist, sharing that if she had only had the financial resources to leave the relationship and get help, it wouldn't have happened. Now, she was a former bank clerk, so she knew what bank clerks see, and she pushed the Australian banking system to do something. Now, you might be surprised by this, but actually, when you think about somebody who's in an unhealthy home situation, their first thought might not be, oh, I need to go to the authorities and get justice. Their first thought is probably, I need to get out of this situation. And getting out means maybe going to their financial institution and saying, I need to withdraw as much money as I can right now. It might mean getting a quick loan. And so, because of her advocacy, Australia has been at the forefront of addressing intimate partner violence through finance. In 2021, the entire Australian Banking Association released an industry guideline to help its members identify potential violence within households and financial abuse. They raised awareness, they trained staff, they implemented internal processes and policies to protect vulnerable customers. So that meant that, like, if a woman showed up at a teller window and said, I have to withdraw all of my money right now, and actually I don't have my ID with me, the teller is trained to be able to say, wow, that's a really big deal to withdraw all of your money. And it's surprising you don't have your ID. That's very unusual. Can you tell me if something's happening at home? If those frontline staff find out that there is something happening at home, they can do things to help. Like they can give an instant no-cost loan to help cover the cost of a security deposit on an apartment. They have resources to help with childcare and pet care, because those things are things that keep people from leaving unsafe situations because of their dependent care responsibilities. They can actually, and this is something that the Banking Association negotiated with the central bank, they can actually allow people to transact without the necessary ID if they find out that the person doesn't have an ID because they had to flee an unsafe situation. And currently, 13 Australian banks have updated their terms and conditions to clearly state that financial abuse is unacceptable customer behavior, and it can result in account suspension or closures. And one other thing, like if you Google most of the Australian banks, and you look at financial abuse or intimate partner violence web pages, there's a very public facing resource that offers financial help, offers resources, offers support beyond banking. And I love this. All of these pages feature a quick exit button, like a red, like there's somebody in the room, I need to exit quickly, like button for safe and immediate departure from the web page. Now, this is important not just for social reasons. This is important because the economic cost of financial abuse in Australia is estimated to be $5.7 billion annually. So it's actually costing financial institutions money. We also see that survivors of financial abuse often face long-term financial hardships, with 60% reporting that they struggle to meet basic living expenses. One of the reasons we promote financial inclusion is because it increases the stability and soundness of the financial system. And if somebody is struggling with their finances, it's actually decreasing the stability of the financial system and decreasing resilience. So since 2020, banks have been progressively introducing real-time blocks of inappropriate language as well in payment depictions or descriptions. So this is like a common form of abuse between people in Australia. Like somebody would send a payment that was worth like 1 cent and have inappropriate language or abusive language in the payment description. And it led to the interception. This policy led to the interception of over 500,000 abusive transactions. Australia is my favorite example of real world systemic response to financial abuse and intimate partner violence. Now, in light of that and recognizing the importance of this day, November 25th, we're looking back at a conversation from our vault with Dr. Anita Kemi DaSilva-Ibru. She's an obstetrics and gynecology consultant and a leader of the Women at Risk International Foundation. It's also called WARIF. That's the acronym. Her foundation addresses gender-based violence. With 20 years experience, her advocacy, including a TED Talk which I've watched, and it's so good, her advocacy focuses on ending gender-based violence through survivor-focused and preventative programs.
Hello, Sonia. Thank you so much for having me today.
I'm glad you're here. And after reading your bio, I think everybody is thinking, wow, Kemi is a superhero. And I like to start by asking all of my guests about their origin story, like their superhero origin story. So what first brought you to the fight against gender-based violence?
Well, my background is in healthcare. As you said, I'm a practicing specialist obstetrician and gynecologist. For the last 20 years, I've been serving a population of girls and women. When I moved back to Nigeria, my home country, many years ago, I started working in the public sector. And I witnessed firsthand the horrific cases of violence against women and girls, and oftentimes by perpetrators that were close to them, a father figure or a guardian, and many times in places that were considered safe, like in their homes or in schools. And I was very concerned. I initially started to offer my services pro bono in my health capacity as best as I could. But then I started to appreciate more and more the limited essential services that were available. And then there was also a dearth of data to inform on the magnitude of the problem as a result of underreporting.
Yeah.
We were early on, when we first started the organization, able to ascertain that based on the statistics that were available, approximately 5%, only 5% of women could access care following a post incident of
Wow.
sexual encounter. And apparently, only 3.5% actually received care. And I started to examine the healthcare system more closely through the lens of these women and girls. And I felt compelled to establish a nonprofit organization, um, very simply to address the prevalence of rape, sexual violence, trafficking, and child abuse of girls and women across communities in Nigeria and on the African continent. Because more and more you'll start to see the similarities across different countries with regards to the prevalence, as well as the infrastructure and the limited services available. So when WARIF was established, we needed to address this overarching objective. And we did this through a unique multi-sectoral approach of integrating healthcare, education, and community intervention to combat the issue. So currently, over the last 8 years, we've been successfully addressing the issue in the space. We prioritize creating safe environments and service provision with our health pillar, where we offer, free post-incident care, forensic examinations, counseling, and social welfare at our rape crisis centers in the communities that we serve. We also offer technical expertise in other communities that are in need of our services. And then the preventative measures through the implementation of programs. We work in the educational space with adolescent schoolgirls and boys, as well as university students. And we also work in communities in urban and rural areas of Nigeria, ensuring that, again, there's a raised awareness, educating and training of survivors and also communities, and just trying to just change the narrative of gender-based violence in a low middle income country like Nigeria.
I love that origin story because it talks about how you were a health provider working one-on-one with people and then just expanded your mission to scalable, large solutions that are kind of use systems thinking to address this major challenge. And I hope, frankly, I hope you end up working yourself out of a job. I hope,
Exactly.
yeah, like the number of people that you end up seeing goes down. Yeah. Now, when you talk in your work about women and girls at risk, can you give us a sense of who you're talking about?
Yes. When we talk about women, we're actually focused on women and girls. Nigeria is a sub Saharan low middle income country on the west coast of Africa. And it's a country that's rich in culture. We have wonderful heritage. But it's also a country that's governed by a patriarchal system that's solely determined by men, placing his value over hers and encouraging an inequality of both between men and women. It's a society where we have certain traditional and cultural practices that sadly encourage the violence against her, such as early child marriage, female genital mutilations. And then we have the social norms that uphold that typical rigid gender roles that men hold, where women are subjugated. And as you said, having no agency over the decision making in her home or even over her well being. And then we have women that are made to carry the shame of this horrific encounter due to this culture of silence and stigmatization, and with grave concerns for her safety and security, because we do have adequate laws, but the enforcement of these laws are pretty much a challenge when she does decide to report the case. And then we think of numbers. Nigeria is the most populated country on the African continent. There are over 200 million of us, and half of us are women. And we're a very young country. The median age is only 17. and over 60% of us are under the age of 24.
Wow.
The statistics is 1 in 4 girls before the age of 18 would have experienced at least one horrific sexual encounter. And then
Wow.
say 3 women between the ages of 15 and 49 would have experienced some sexual or physical violent encounter. And so the magnitude of the problem within the context of the challenges working in an environment like Nigeria is another major reason why WARIF was established and why I do what I do.
Thanks for giving us that picture of what we're talking about when we're talking about women at risk. That was tremendously useful and very sobering as well. I'd like to turn now to talking a little bit about financial services. And for our listeners, just to give you a peek behind the curtain here, when we prepare for these podcasts, we usually send questions in advance. And I sent a question to Kemi, and I asked about insurance. Like, what kind of insurance do women have that you work with? And she replied back, there's no insurance. Like, insurance products are not really available or used by WARF beneficiaries and survivors, and therefore play a limited role. So I wanted to ask you, like, when we consider economic shocks, like medical emergencies, housing instability, sudden loss of income, this lack of coverage is concerning and leaves women even more vulnerable than I expected. From your perspective as a healthcare professional, do you see potential in more accessible and inclusive insurance products for women facing gender-based violence? Like, what really helps women in their hour of need when it comes to resources?
Right. Well, in Nigeria, we do have healthcare insurance. I mean, through the National Health Insurance Scheme and through private providers. However, as seen in many environments, these insurance products provide financial protection against health costs, but mainly for foremost sector workers. And private insurance is also very expensive and out of reach for most Nigerians, particularly women in the informal sector. The 200 plus population, 54% of us are actually in rural communities. So they're not designed to meet the unique needs of a gender-based violence survivor. They're not flexible enough. I mean, the care that's offered does not go beyond the traditional insurance plans that would provide perhaps a sexual transmitted disease panel testing or emergency care. So when you say a survivor and her immediate care in that hour of need, this should include a medical insurance package that would cover the cost of that physical trauma that she's had. It should cover her reproductive health needs. And then it should cover her mental health care, which is a big component of her treatment plan, but is often not available to her, as well as her legal services. These also should be prioritized. A survivor often needs both healthcare services provided for and then the ability to seek justice in navigating her recovery. So at the WARIF Rape Crisis Centers, we offer both services free of charge, but then we appreciate that this can be scaled to so many more women if insurance products could actually be accessed. And then the advantages of making these products accessible would then allow for these women to have a financial safety net during that very vulnerable period and the post-incident care that she needs as and when these encounters occur.
Well, and you talked earlier about, like, just the challenge of gender-based violence being multi-causal. There's so many different things you could point to and say it's culture, it is history, it's financial, it's contextual. There's so many different drivers of gender-based violence. So it makes sense that solutions would also have to be complex. Mental health provision, physical health, the financial aspect that comes with that. Housing is a completely separate thing, like how to remove somebody from an unsafe situation. And so I'd love to chat a little bit about rebuilding. Like, we at Women's World Banking think access to financial tools can be critical to survivors as they rebuild their lives. I wanted to ask you, from your vantage point, How can financial institutions create products and services that empower survivors both during and after, importantly, after their recovery journey?
Right. So, I mean, during her recovery journey, as we just mentioned, access to these insurance products will certainly be helpful. And after her journey, perhaps, a broader system of financial and social support can be made available to her. These financial support programs that would provide, say, emergency funds or like a crisis intervention service, and that would help her for housing costs if she has to leave the home of abuse, or it could help replace lost income because of loss of productivity, because she has to stay home and can't go to work all year round. So these long-term solutions are definitely beneficial to a woman that's trying to rebuild. Also, financial literacy programs can be made available to her to help break that vulnerability of, abuse. Many women back in Nigeria, as mentioned, work in an informal sector. Many of them lack education because, sadly, when the choices are made as to who to be sent to school, her brother is usually the one that gets the opportunities. These are women that are then living, as we described, in these environments where she is subjugated and probably not allowed to go to work. And so when she's faced with these abusive scenarios, she's financially constrained. And so for her to leave, which would appear to be a very easy decision, is one that she cannot make so readily, especially when she has children. And this is because culturally, to leave your marital home is actually a shameful act. And her family actually may even return her if she were to go home to ask for assistance. She certainly won't be able to get this assistance from her in laws and her relatives. And she hasn't got enough savings at that point in time to make those decisions to be able to protect her and her family. So this is where these support programs are so critical. If she is one that has started a business, a microfinance loan will certainly be helpful to her so she can grow this business and allow her to move on. As you rightly said, Sonia, we found that 98% of cases of intimate partner violence, financial abuse plays a significant role. And we do know that, she's not economically empowered and she has to stay at home and rely on her partner, who is typically that abuser. And so at the organization, recognizing this, under our community programs, we design vocational skill acquisition training programs for women in the informal sector.
That's amazing.
Thank you. Recognizing that these are women that are smart, brave women, but they just don't have the skills to be able to become financially independent and make those right decisions. We run basic financial literacy skills so she understands that she doesn't need to hide her money under the bed where he finds it anyway, beats her and spends it, that she can open a bank account. She can use a thumbprint, for instance, and then she can save her money in these financial institutions. And then, of course, we encourage financial institutions to provide tailored financial products for women at risk. We have situations where we talk about empowering women, as you said, and we see, of course, the obvious advantage to that. But we also recognize that there are barriers to this. We know that the lack of education and awareness, we know that these cultural norms that we've described expose women to even more violence. And that these scenarios, when they occur, we have to recognize that we need to protect the women in these particular situations. And this is where NGOs like ours come into play, and we can partner with these women to help her navigate through this. This is where, as I said, financial institutions like banks can offer anonymous accounts so her partner doesn't track her money.
Yeah.
Perhaps have a situation where she does not need a male guarantor when she goes for that loan. And then we need to encourage gender sensitive policies that allow women to access these financial programs without discrimination, and then empower her so she can manage these funds independently.
And now, a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. You mentioned so many things I want to follow up on. I absolutely love hearing about interventions that are transforming culture just by their very nature of existing. I mean, the work that you're doing to empower women with skills and finance alongside of that is transformational. Like giving her agency in her community can literally change how women are viewed in a particular area with ripple effects. There are a couple other things you mentioned that I think are gender transformational plays. One is just like individual bank policies, like not having a male guarantor or allowing individual accounts that other household members don't have access to information about. Like, again, those are things that create systems where women all of a sudden have privacy that they wouldn't have had otherwise. You also mentioned biometrics, and I think that's a big one. Like digital ID is foundationally important for women's agency. And it's something we don't often think about, like, oh, ID is so important for the role that women are allowed to play in a culture. But I want to share a quick story. I was working with an institution in Malawi that had attached a biometric ID to debit cards. And there was a woman in a particular community whose husband died of AIDS. And her in-laws came. And in this particular rural community, there was a culture where her in-laws could come and seize all of her property. They were supposed to take care of her as well in the spirit of caring for the widow of somebody who passed away in your family. But because it was so poor in this community, the in-laws just kind of stopped caring for the family members. And they found her debit card. They went to the bank. Everybody in her brother-in-law's family tried their fingerprint. They took her debit card back to her and gave it to her. And they were like, this one doesn't work, so you can keep this. But they took all of her livestock and possessions. So she still had the money that she had saved up in her account. And in this community, there was a tradition that was born then of like when women got married, all of the other women would come together and instead of bridal shower gifts, would pool money and allow her to open her own account so that she had money to make decisions. And I think these kinds of changes are so critically important and come from things that governments issue like IDs or policies that banks make, but they make such a difference. And so I'm so glad you talked about some of those things like financial literacy, financial inclusion, access to credit, savings, training, because these things are gender transformational and preventative measures for gender-based violence.
Absolutely.
I'd love to turn now to disrupted education and employment, which you mentioned. What are some holistic strategies that can help survivors gain independence and regain control of their financial future after a tremendous economic shock, like loss of work or something that happens after they've experienced violence?
So, like you said, experiencing intimate partner violence not only negatively affects a woman's physical and psychosocial well-being, but it also affects her ability to be engaged all year round in paid employment because she stays home on the days that she's physically unwell as a result of being beaten by her partner. And this in turn has a negative economic consequence on the country. In Nigeria, the impact of this actually translates to an estimated loss of 2% of the nation's annual GDP of $440 billion. So that's
Wow.
$8 billion that's lost. So for us to address this issue it requires a multifaceted approach, a holistic strategy that includes economically empowering her, the woman, but then we also need government policy implementation. And then we need substantial financial investments from both the public and the private sector. When we're advocating for economic empowerment from both public and private sectors, as well as CSOs, civil society organizations like WARIF, we must emphasize that this economic empowerment is actually crucial to combating gender-based violence. Because these financial inclusion programs, when they are implemented, which includes the vocational skills acquisition programs that I mentioned earlier, they allow women to start to make all these autonomous decisions and reduce the susceptibility to violence. We have government policy implementation that, somewhat working. But what we need, at least in my part of the world, is a call for dedicated funding, like a gender fund. It could be through allocating a percentage of the national tax revenue, perhaps, just so we can enhance awareness campaigns, we could strengthen enforcement mechanisms, and we could actually start to assure the safety of these women. And then in the private sector, we can start by collaborating and raising gender-based violence funds aimed at promoting women's businesses, allowing them economic opportunities that they would ordinarily have. And then these initiatives would then enhance economic opportunities for women in general. And then we could start to see the ripple effect when we start to see the shift. I mean, I know that not in my lifetime, but it's said that gender parity in sub-Saharan Africa is not for another 130 years.
Wow.
So we have to think out of the box. We have to start thinking of innovative ways in which we can frog leap and play catch up.
That's what we found on the financial side in Nigeria as well, in terms of like women's versus men's account access.
Absolutely.
With current trends, it'll be 105 years until Nigeria reaches parity in even access to bank accounts. We can't wait for that. I'm not going to be around to see that in 105 years.
Right.
And so we can't wait. This is so urgent.
It's now. The time is now.
Yeah.
The time is now.
You've been mentioning, as we've been talking, partnerships. You mentioned government, you mentioned private sector. WARIF is a nonprofit. How do you envision partnerships working, especially between financial institutions and organizations like yours? I wonder if you can talk more explicitly about that.
Well, in my opinion, if we're going to successfully tackle the issue of gender-based violence, I find that we can't have the healthcare systems and then advocacy working and operating in silos. There has to be an intersection, a partnership that can be harnessed so that we can start to maximize the impact in transforming communities. And this now involves the participation of all key players, both from these health sector organizations and CSOs like ours, as well as the committed financial institutions and the donors. And they can come together in that relevant decision-making stage so that we can then have a more comprehensive approach. I find that many a time financial institutions and donors place funding in the hands of middlemen. These are organizations that disperse funds, but they have very little knowledge about the fragile society that's in need. So implementation of programs or the provision of a service that best supports the survivor, especially those that are recovering from trauma, is not met. But if you actively involve stakeholders from these affected communities, that would then play a role in not just the decision making, but in the fund allocation, then you start to ensure that your programs are genuinely impacting because they're actually addressing the real needs of these communities. And then this ensures also that the funding reaches the most marginalized, and that's when we start to see that systemic change. I also find when I think about partnerships, especially between these two parties, is that financial institutions traditionally tend to expect a rather short-term target-oriented result,
Huh.
right? In terms of implemented programs and so on, as opposed to organizations that are implementing the programs that are actually more interested in sustainable impact-oriented results. And when you appreciate this, you recognize that we have to prioritize longer term and more flexible funding from financial institutions so that we would allow for organizations to enhance their capacity, explore innovative strategies, and then adapt to this evolving context when you're tackling challenges like gender based violence more effectively.
Yeah. Our listeners are primarily financial institutions, regulators, and policymakers in the financial space. If you were to make one recommendation to financial institutions that want to take a first step to address gender-based violence, what would it be?
Well, I would say that you first have to understand the problem through the lens of the community and the survivors you're trying to reach. I mean, gender based violence is a global problem, but it is also a regional one with specific nuances and practices based on each region. And these social drivers, many a time, are age old traditional norms and practices that are usually culturally sensitive. And so they need to be handled accordingly. So that would be, in my opinion, the first recommendation to a financial institution. Take the time to actually understand the problem through the lens of the community that you're trying to reach. So it's a win-win.
That's tremendously important, and is also the reason that we at Women's World Banking always start with original research before we do any work. We've talked with 25,000 women over the last 5 years about their financial lives, because you can't design products or interventions without talking to women first about what they're experiencing. So that's a great reminder. Kemi, I'm so glad you exist in the world. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing for women in your country, in your region. I mean, it's just stunning, and it's really inspiring. I'm so appreciative of you and your work, and also for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
What a conversation. I mean, there are so many things there that that I'll be sitting with. They really resonate with me. Now, if there's anything in this conversation that kind of brought up something for you, I just want to start with this. Or if somebody you know is experiencing domestic violence right now, or if you yourself are, I would urge you to seek help. We're putting some resources in the YouTube comments where this episode is posted on YouTube, but a quick internet search will also get you resources that you need to get support. So let me just start with that and say, if you need help, please get it. Now, if there's anything that this conversation emphasizes for me on a professional level, it's that no one can say that intimate partner violence is just a domestic private issue. It's something that really connects with the economic systems that women engage with. And economic systems can either address intimate partner violence, or they can perpetuate the structures that limit women's agency. I would love to see financial institutions in my own country and around the world acknowledge that they are actually on the front lines against intimate partner violence and take that on. Now, I look forward to our next conversation in December. It'll be our last one of the year. And until then, please stay engaged, stay informed. Make sure to give us some feedback in the form of rating or subscribing or leaving us a comment on any of your favorite podcast platforms. And gosh, what a wild year it's been. Next episode, we're going to discuss some of that. I look forward to it. See you next time.